The Somerset, Ann Arbor, Scary Kids Scaring Kids, Greeley Estates, Lydia, Bless the Fall, The Word Alive, Eyes Set to Kill, This Century. At a first glance, it may appear as though that these bands have absolutely nothing in common with each other. You may even be confused, wondering to yourself, Cozy, why are you mentioning all these seemingly random scene bands of all different genres in rapid succession? What is the meaning of this, and what does it have anything to do with the subject of the YouTube video that I clicked on? Well, dear viewer, let me tell you, although it may shock and awe you, all of these bands that I had just mentioned do in fact have one common thread, one theme in common with one another, one fact about all these bands that is the same for all of them. A rather defining fact, one might even say. The common thread between all of these bands, get ready, is this. Are you sitting down? You might want to be sitting down for this. All of these bands all hail from the exact same geographical location, the greater area of lovely, hot Phoenix, Arizona. That's right. What was happening in Arizona in the mid to late 2000s besides a shit ton of deserts and cactuses and retirement homes and 120-degree weather? Well, apparently a whole crop of pop punk and metalcore bands that all went on to achieve somewhat significant success within the Warped Tour scene. Apparently, it's just way too hot or way too fucking boring in Arizona, or both, to do anything. So all of the kids just stayed inside and devoted all their time to starting bands and promoting themselves on MySpace before eventually all the labels and Warped Tour and alternative press and the scene stardom came calling. There is one band though, one very prominent band from the Arizona scene that I have neglected to mention. A band who, when they started, were attractive young 18-year-old kids who basically had it all. The looks, the relatability, catchy, heartfelt songs with a memorable pop sensibility, and not to mention the looks, the image. They really had it. To the untrained eye, when this band first came out, they might have seemed like just another flash in the pan, flippy-haired, I don't know, cute is what we aim for, ripoff, who blew up way quicker than most of their peers, causing all the older, jaded scene bands who had been roughing it out, touring for years, who still had yet to reach even close to the amount of success that this band had experienced in their first year and a half of being in a band, to scoff at this band and look down upon them as just some trendy neon flash in the pan, expecting them to burn out just as quickly as they exploded within another year or two. And despite being one of those bands similar to the ilk of a Forever the Sickest Kids, whose trendy neon style had older people in the scene saying, "There's no way in hell these guys are going to be around 10 years from now," and to be fair, they were right about a lot of those bands. It is over 10 years from 2008 now, and yes, a lot of those bands are indeed defunct, not around anymore. However, the bands that we are going to be talking about today have miraculously defied all odds and are not only still around today, but they have managed to avoid being a nostalgia act and have somehow really genuinely aged like a fine wine, still embracing where they came from, but unlike most neon 2008 pop punk bands, have reached the position most bands can only dream of. They're actually making the best music of their entire career now, 12 or 13 years into the game. And although I do want to talk all about their newer music and what they've evolved into and how they sort of reinvented themselves over the years, and I will be doing this in a future video, but today, my friends, we will be exploring, yes, the early history of, no joke, one of my favorite bands of all time, the Maine. But before we do that, a quick word, a quick message from today's sponsor. Check it. Oh hey, what up? Didn't see you there. Yeah, I got a question for y'all. Do y'all miss the days of Scene Kid neon cartoon monster merch like this? Or perhaps this? Or even this? You know, the kind of shirts that all your favorite neon pop punk bands and metalcore, crabcore bands used to rock on the Warped Tour. Well, I know that a lot of those shirts are, it's vintage at this point, but there's a new clothing line on the block that's rocking the same swag that can help you rock the same swag as all of your favorite 2009 neon pop punk bands. What is that clothing line, you ask? Well, let me tell you. Well, you see, it's called Ride or Die Clothing. It's an epic clothing line out of California. They're good friends of mine. If you follow me on social media, you might see me rocking their swag all the time. And honestly, I fucking swear by their clothes. I love them, and I think that you should buy them too, because you will look swagalicious, and all the people will be like, wow, look at that guy's swag. That person's got a lot of swag with the Ride or Die clothes, man. Yeah, I'm telling you, you're gonna look fresh. Buy the shit. If you want to have epic neon scene kid swag like me and support a good up and coming brand, you can go to @RideOrDieBrand on Instagram. I'm pretty sure it's also @RideOrDieBrand on Twitter and Facebook as well. And if you want to purchase some of these threads, rideordieclothing.net. That's rideordieclothing.net for all your neon scene kid swag. Thank you for your time. Back to the video.
Come on, she calls me sweet. I love the things she puts me still dry. When she watches the sun, she's only one. I want to see you guys get off your feet out there. Let's go. She loved me, that little bit of light. Everything of me, just come with me tonight. You know I need you, just like you need me. Can't stop, won't stop. I must be dreaming. Can't stop, won't stop. I must be dreaming. Fuck yeah! If y'all know it, help me out.
So, the Maine. Let's jump right into it, shall we? Now, like most bands, the Maine formed out of the ashes of the dissolution of a few different high school Arizona local bands who preceded the Maine. Different members came together, you get the idea. Join me for a moment as we travel back in time into the past, into a mystical year called 2003, where a young 13-year-old boy named Garrett Nicholson, who was into bands in the Warped Tour scene like The Used at the time, started a band with some of his friends who were also around 13 to 14 years old at the time, called the Kerosene Kids. Now, Garrett's band, the Kerosene Kids, consisted of, obviously, Garrett Nicholson on bass, a kid named Ryan Osterman on guitar, another kid named Tony Pizzuti, also on guitar, and they also had a singer and a drummer, but unfortunately those people don't really matter in the greater context of the story, so sorry guys. But the Kerosene Kids made music that was of the post-hardcore screamo variety, kind of similar to bands like, you know, Emery or Silverstein or that kind of thing that was going on at the time. Matchbook Romance, maybe a little From First to Last.
You won't let me down. You lie. I guess you're better than that. I can't lost now.
Which was the kind of music that the members of the band were into at the time, and it was obviously also the kind of music that was super popular in not only the Warped Tour, but the Arizona local scene at the time as well, with bands like Scary Kids Scaring Kids, Greeley Estates, and Bless the Fall, leading by example in the Arizona scene and achieving feats like gaining a sizable fan base, getting signed to a record label, and going on Warped Tour, showing the younger bands in the scene, the local scene as it were, that it was possible to accomplish your dreams and gain success in the alternative music scene by by playing this style of screamo music, or whatever you want to call it, leading to young bands like the Kerosene Kids to be formed and start playing out. Now, the Kerosene Kids wrote some songs and began playing local shows around the area, and pretty immediately after forming, because of the connections certain members of the band had already established within their local scene, a guy by the name of Tim Kirch reached out to the Kerosene Kids and offered to be their manager, and the band took him up on this offer. You see, Tim, who was a little bit older than the rest of the Kerosene Kids, was a guy who was pretty well known around the Arizona local scene for booking shows, promoting shows, managing local bands, printing t-shirts, and taking pictures, and doing other various sort of press-related things behind the scenes, music help things to help out bands in the scene. You know what I mean. He worked with a lot of, if not most of those local Arizona bands back in the day before eventually working his way up to being a tour manager for bigger bands like this Providence, and he still works closely with the Maine to this day as their manager and does a damn fine job at it. So, anyways, back to the Kerosene Kids. With Tim Kirch now as their manager, things were going well for them. They began to write songs and started making a name for themselves in the local scene. After about 6 months or so, however, their original drummer had left the band. Unsure what to do next, the Kerosene Kids turned to their manager Tim Kirch for advice, for guidance, for help. Tim mentioned to the Kerosene Kids that he had a little brother named Pat Kirch who played the drums, and he suggested that they try him out. Little did they know this would be a historic joining of forces, but we'll find out why. Stay tuned. So, they auditioned Pat, and according to Garrett, he played really hard and really well, and they were impressed by his drumming chops, so boom! Lo and behold, the young Pat Kirch was now officially the drummer of the Kerosene Kids. It is also worth noting that at the time, much like Garrett and some of the other members of the Kerosene Kids, Pat Kirch was obsessed with bands in the scene like The Used and Taking Back Sunday, and shared the same dream of making it as a touring rock band and dedicating his life to the band. Now, with Pat behind the kit, the Kerosene Kids continued to write songs and play shows and build up a name for themselves in the local scene, gaining a small following and playing plenty of shows with other Arizona local bands such as Bless the Fall and Ann Arbor. Eventually, the band put together an EP and also booked an album release show for this EP, which brought out an astonishing 900 people, which is a pretty insane number of people to come out and watch a high school screamo band. Eventually, however, despite the success that the Kerosene Kids were experiencing locally, Garrett and Pat were starting to grow a little bit tired of playing heavier music and just playing a bunch of breakdowns and whatnot, as they began to grow a little bit and expand their musical palette, and they started listening to more pop-punk bands like Cartel or The Academy Is. Show me something we haven't heard yet, but I'm not convinced in your heart, and even finding great interest in more chill indie rock type bands like Copeland or The Honorary Title. Everybody knows that you'd break your neck to keep your chin up. Aside from Garrett and Pat beginning to have a desire to play different styles of music, it also became apparent to them that certain other members of the Kerosene Kids weren't as dedicated as they were to putting all their time and energy into trying to make it to the next level as a band and tour all the time and get signed and live the dream and all that. It's not for everybody. And because of these arising challenges, the Kerosene Kids ultimately, at that point, called it quits. Rest in peace, Kerosene Kids. Now, following the dissolution of this band, the first thing that I want to mention is that Tony Pizzuti, who I mentioned earlier played guitar in the Kerosene Kids, a couple years after they broke up, ended up playing guitar for the band The Word Alive. You probably know him. They're still to this day a very popular metalcore band in the Warped Tour world, and he is still a member of that band. A little interesting factoid, that's why I had mentioned his name earlier. But besides Besides that, interestingly enough, once Kerosene Kids had split, Pat and Garrett had it in their minds that they were officially done playing in bands. Their dream was no longer to make it in a touring band, and instead they were now going to build a studio and start recording bands. This became their new goal, their new dream, if you will. Build a studio, record bands, Pat and Garrett. That's what they were going to do. Also, just for reference, it was around 2006 at this point. But, okay, so what do you need if you're trying to build a studio, right? You need gear. You need studio equipment. Do you know what you need in order to purchase gear and studio equipment? You need fucking money. Pat and Garrett were like 16 at this time. You know, they didn't have any money. So they put their heads together and decided that to make some money in order to buy some studio equipment, they were going to bring the Kerosene Kids back for one reunion show and book the show themselves, make the money, use the money made from that show to kickstart their studio. Brilliant plan. So, Pat and Garrett booked the show themselves, and about 500 people came out, which is still an amazingly great turnout for a high school local band show. I don't know how they did that, but they did. And afterwards, Pat and Garrett had a nice little chunk of change in their hands for their studio. But, as the story goes, miraculously, in a very strange turn of events, seemingly within a few days after Garrett and Pat's reunion show, where they acquired the money to start building their studio and whatnot, one night, Pat got a phone call from a guy named John O'Callahan, who was at a party and, was a little bit inebriated, and John apparently told Pat over the phone that he wanted to be in a band with him, and that he wanted to sing. Now, who the hell is John O'Callahan, and why does he want to sing in a band with Pat? Well, let's rewind the clock once again a little bit to a few years prior. So, while Pat and Garrett were 15 years old and playing in the Kerosene Kids, who were managed by Pat's older brother Tim had his own group of friends who were a few years older than Pat and Garrett and their friends and the Kerosene Kids and whatnot. You get the idea. Tim's friends included people like Lauren Brinton, who played drums in the band Lydia and later ended up in A Rocket to the Moon. Eric Halverson was also a friend of Tim's, who played in a band called Bad Motivation, and he actually also ended up playing in A Rocket to the Moon. Another one of Tim's friends was Jared Monaco, who also played in Bad Motivation, as well as this guy, John O'Callahan. Now, obviously, most of Tim's friends were like band guys who played music in bands, obviously, and were obsessed with music and whatnot, and, just wanted to go on tour. But John O'Callahan, however, did not play in a band, and he didn't even play music at all in general, or really show any interest in being in a band or playing music. He, at the time, believe it or not, was more of a preppy kid, kind of a sporty dude, who played baseball, sporty preppy kid who just happened to be friends with all the band guys. He didn't have any scene hair, nothing. He was just this, baseball player guy who was friends with the band guys. And John was interested in music and listened to scene bands at the time, like Matchbook Romance and whatnot, but he just didn't, like I said, didn't play music, didn't show much interest in it, whatever. Legend has it that in the summer of 2006, the band Lydia, who, were friends with Tim Kirch, were booked to play on about 2 weeks of that summer's Warped Tour and needed a merch person. Lauren, the drummer, who knew John through Tim's friend circle, asked John if he wanted to come on tour with them and sell merch for Lydia at Warped Tour 2006. Now, John, who had 18 years old, just graduated high school at that time, and, despite him never having been on tour before, he kind of had nothing else better going on, so he said yes. So, John went out on tour with Lydia and sold merch for them on Warped, and according to Lauren Brinton, it seems like after this experience, a light bulb kind of went off in John's head, where he then realized that touring is fucking dope. Being on the road with your homies and driving around and playing shows and meeting people is fucking awesome. John had a great time, and he kind of, low-key realized that he wanted to do more of that. So, around after that Warped Tour, Pat and Garrett ended up meeting John for the first time, just through mutual friends and Pat's brother Tim. And according to Garrett, he thought that John was nice, but there was, no thought in his head that John would ever have any desire to, be in a band or to sing, because John was still this, preppy kind of baseball player guy. Sporty. I mean, John was 18 and had never played music before. That's kind of rare, I feel like. Not unheard of, but, kind of rare, especially amongst, all these Warped Tour type bands where, the bands are getting signed when they're all 16 years old or whatever, around that time, you know what I mean? Anyways, until a couple months later, John was at a party with Eric Halverson, Lauren Brinton, Tim Kirch, and that whole group of guys, and for whatever reason, I'm assuming he had, tossed back a few drinks, had some liquid courage in him, John ended up apparently, picking up an acoustic guitar and singing a song at this party, and he just kind of all of a sudden just realized that he could sing pretty well. He had a pretty good voice, and he liked it, and everyone else at the party was like, holy shit, dude, you can sing, you've got a good voice. Everyone liked it too. And it was that night, apparently, John... Looking at the story, I'm like, he was definitely drunk, but he ended up calling Pat really late at night from this party and telling him, hey man, I want to sing in your band. I want to be in a band with you and sing, because John knew Pat as this band guy. Now, obviously, to Pat and even to the rest of John's friend group, John wanting to join a band and be the singer seemed extremely out of the ordinary and kind of strange. But a couple days after that party, Pat had John come over to his house, and Pat recorded John playing acoustic guitar and singing the song Come Back Down by the incredible, very underrated indie rock band called Ivory, who I love, and everyone watching this video should go check out if you haven't. They were a band from around back in the mid-2000s who Pat, Garrett, and John, and all those guys in the Maine were obsessed with and actually got their name from, but we'll get into that more in a second. Now, John performed this song by Ivory, and Pat was absolutely blown away by John's voice, and he ended up recording John singing this song on his laptop and then brought it over to Garrett's house, and Garrett was also blown away. They absolutely loved John's voice. It was something different, something unique, and something special. In their old band, the Kerosene Kids, the singer of that band was all right for what he was, but another light bulb went off in Pat and Garrett's heads at that moment when they realized John's voice was kind of that missing musical puzzle piece which they never had in their past band. It was in that moment that they realized maybe they should put their plans to start a studio on hold and start a new band with John as their singer. And this was basically the start of the Maine. It was around December of 2006, January of 2007, and Pat and Garrett got together with John on vocals, Pat on drums, and Garrett on bass. They approached Ryan Osterman, who used to play guitar in the Kerosene Kids, to play guitar in the new band, to which he said yes. And Ryan also got a guy he knew named Alex Ross to play second guitar and also to play piano in the band. And with that, the OG lineup was complete. Now, believe it or not, the original idea for the Maine was actually to be more of a soft indie rock type band, if you can believe it. All the members had obviously roots of playing in heavy, screamo type bands, but, as I mentioned, we're all a bit burnt out on playing that kind of music, and at the time, they were all super into bands like Copeland, or The Honorary Title, and Ben Queller, and Daphne Loves Derby, and things of that nature, and were super inspired by that kind of music and wanted their new band to embrace that style and that aesthetic. Another big reason, and I had again, touched on this earlier a little bit. A big reason why they wanted to go in the soft indie rock direction was because of a band called Ivory. I mean, Ivory is a big proponent in the early history of the Maine. I mean, after all, it was a song by Ivory that John sang that basically got Pat and Garrett to agree to be in a band with him. Now, Ivory was an indie rock band from Wisconsin who were around for a short period of time in the mid-2000s. They weren't super well known, and to this day are still fairly unknown, and it's very hard to find any real information about this band online, but you can find their music, which is all up on YouTube. They had one self-titled EP put out in 2005, as well as a full-length album which came out sometime after. This band, I mentioned this earlier, but they are absolutely fucking amazing in my opinion. I can't stress that enough. I absolutely love Ivory. I think it's a shame that more people don't know about them and that they're not, like, given the, proper recognition that they should have. If you're into bands like Copeland or Daphne Loves Derby, you will definitely love the band Ivory, and I highly recommend checking them out. Anyway, back to the Maine. So basically, John and Pat and Garrett and Ryan and all of the guys were obsessed with Ivory at the time. In fact, they kind of thought that John's voice sounded a lot like the singer of Ivory's voice. So because of this, they wanted to do their own version of that chill indie rock sound, and they also actually got their band name from an Ivory song called Coast of Maine. Which they had shortened to just The Maine. And with that, they took some promo pictures, wrote some of their first songs, basically hijacked the old MySpace account for Kerosene Kids, which already had 10,000 friends added on it, used that MySpace and announced their new band, The Maine, to the world. Then they filmed an acoustic video with John singing, Ryan playing guitar, and Alex playing piano, where they played one of the first songs they had ever written as a band called Daisy, which they uploaded to the internet to show the world their chops, if you will.
Hi, we're the Maine. This song's called Daisy. I picked you up.
Right off the bat, as most bands did at the time, began promoting super hard on MySpace, adding tons and tons of people, and building relationships with people online, and showing people their music and their band to anybody who might care. Logging on to Panic at the Disco's MySpace page, and looking at all of their friends and their comments, and adding all those people, and being like, hey, you like Panic at the Disco? Check out our band, you might like us too. That type of shit. Y'all remember MySpace? Probably. Because, as bands had kind of figured out back in the mid to late 2000s with the rise of the internet and social networking and all that, you could basically build a huge audience and jumpstart your career very quickly just by putting the work in and to promoting your music to people on MySpace and Pure Volume, giving your band a chance at making a name for yourself and getting signed to a record label, sometimes without even playing a show outside of your town yet. Panic at the Disco. Although nowadays this idea of blowing up online is not too far-fetched, and it's pretty much standard practice at this point to have a prominent online presence if you want to get your band off the ground or your company or whatever the fuck. But at the time, back in 2007, this was still a very new concept, and promoting your music online was almost exclusively pioneered, in my eyes, by bands who were a part of the Warped Tour scene in the mid-2000s. And as well as, you know, people like Soulja Boy too, but that's a whole other story. Besides, Pat and Garrett were still in high school at the time, so it's not like the band could even just pick up and start touring and, you know, doing all that, even if they wanted to. But they were committed and dedicated to getting their band going and building up a fan base so that once they did graduate high school, they could hopefully just head right out on the road right then, utilizing the online audience they had already amassed for themselves. It was a pretty smart idea. So it was off to the races as far as promotion on MySpace.
Hi guys, we're the Maine. Thanks for checking out our page.
We're going to be posting 4 acoustic videos over this next month.
And we'll be posting a recorded version of one of the acoustic songs as well.
So thanks for stopping by. We love you and thanks for the support.
We'll talk to you soon.
Anyways, aside from their internet promotion savviness from the jump, the Maine also had the added benefactor of Pat's older brother Tim, who was managing the bands. But unlike back in the Kerosene Kids days, Tim Kirch had actually built up quite a repertoire within the music scene for himself at that point, doing management for bands like, you know, bigger bands like This Providence and Lydia and The Deer Hunter, who at the time were on a much bigger level than the Maine. So, you know, and were pretty prevalent in the scene. So he had, at that point, a lot more connections within the music scene as a whole, and he was able to get the Maine as many big, legit opportunities as he could. Definitely much more than he could for the Kerosene Kids. So they were kind of growing together. You know, the Pat and Garrett's band were getting more legit, and so was, you know, his brother Tim as a manager in the scene. It's pretty cool, kind of side by side, you know what I mean? I don't know. Now, within their first few months of being a band, the young, ripe The Maine released their first 2 fully recorded, full band electric songs, which, the first one was the song Daisy, which had, you know, been previously released acoustically, as well as a brand new song called The Town's Been Talkin'. Now, while Daisy definitely embraces the roots, you know, the original idea, if you will, of the sound of the Maine, which the more indie rock, the honorary title Ben Queller kind of thing, The Town's Been Talkin' brings something a little different to the table and was more representative of where the Maine actually ended up going with their sound in the future. While The Town's Been Talkin' still maintains the lush, heartfelt, chilled out indie rock breeziness reminiscent of the first 2 Copeland records, in this track the Maine injected a hearty dose of youthful neon pop-punk influence in there as well, reminiscent of more classic acts in the scene, such as maybe Where You Wanna Be era Taking Back Sunday, and also some hints of more current artists in the scene at the time, such as the extremely popular and extremely neon Cute Is What We Aim For. For me personally, I like to think of the first few releases by the Maine as like imagining what would happen if the record In Motion by Copeland had a baby with, I don't know, the same old Blood Rush with a new touch by Cute Is What We Aim For. It kind of sounds like a really fucked up experiment gone wrong on paper, right? You know, indie rock and neon pop punk. Like, what? That doesn't make sense. But in practice, the Maine actually, you know, surprisingly really murdered the execution of this blend of neon pop punk and Ben Queller-esque indie rock and really brought something new and different into the cookie-cutter, monotonous, oversaturated neon pop punk wave at that time. That's what I think. Anyways, following the release of these first 2 songs, which they had put up onto their MySpace page, the Maine then announced the release of their upcoming debut EP, which was just a digital release called Stay Up, Get Down. Now, the Stay Up, Get Down EP featured the 2 songs that had already been released, Daisy and The Town's Been Talkin', as well as 2 brand new songs, one called Shake It and one called Count 'Em 1, 2, 3. Now, the Stay Up, Get Down EP is, in my opinion, a very, very solid and standout first release, and hearing these songs, it makes sense why this band seemingly started to blow up out of nowhere back in 2007. As I hinted at earlier, the newer songs on this EP continued on in the more neon pop-punk direction that they had displayed on The Town's Been Talkin', as opposed to the more indie rock influenced Daisy, and Shake It, for example, which, although still features chilled out, silky smooth vocals laden with falsetto from vocalist John O'Callaghan, musically it is definitely the most upbeat, raw, rockin' song the band had ever penned up until that point. Also, Count 'Em 1, 2, 3, which is definitely my personal favorite song on this EP, and is probably one of my favorite early The Maine songs in general, has, in my opinion, the best chorus that they had ever written up to that point, and also has one of the catchiest and most infectious guitar riffs they had ever written in the verses at that time. This song, Count 'Em 1, 2, 3, has a bit more of a Chroma-era Cartel influence to it, and also has a lot in common with the Maine's contemporary bands who were coming out around the same time, such as the Somerset or All Time Low. However, this song's catchiness and powerful chorus and ability to get stuck in your head for days makes it stand out from the pack, and helped the Maine start just blowing up in the local scene once the EP came out, as well as blowing up, nationally and I guess worldwide on MySpace and Pure Volume as well. But before we get into that, the blowing up, as it were, I do have to make note that although a song like Count 'Em 1, 2, 3 was possibly the most contemporary, neon pop-punk sounding song that the Maine had written up to that point, the main thing, no pun intended, that kept it super unique and different from other neon pop-punk bands at the time, and kept it rooted and tied to the original, indie rock sort of idea for the Maine sound, was definitely John O'Callaghan's unique vocals. His vocals were very different for a pop-punk band, and, very, like I said, unique. His vocals were chill, relaxed, smooth. He sounded like he had just smoked a gigantic fat blunt in the woods and was just sitting back in a reclining massage chair while he tracked vocals or something. You know what I mean? Like, he just sounded super relaxed. And at the time, pretty much all pop-punk bands had either the, classic New Found Glory or Blink-182 style super nasally vocals, or at the time, the Patrick Stump, soulful belting in your face right down the middle vocals had also become pretty common as well. Pop-punk as a genre historically had never been known for chilled out vocals, and while John O'Callaghan's vocal style would have fit in quite well and wouldn't have really sounded that unique or different in a Copeland-esque or Daphne Loves Derby-esque indie rock band, his smooth chilled out vocal style hadn't ever really been done before, as far as I know, over a more neon pop punk sounding band, causing the Maine to, in my opinion, stand out as something fresh and unique, and even if a lot of people didn't even realize that about his vocals at the time, or make that association, it's definitely something that I think made them special. One of the first things that I loved about the band were John's vocals. So, because of John's vocals, as well as their sound being rooted in a more indie rock style, although the Maine were now beginning to be more associated with the, neon pop-punk wave with songs like Count 'Em 1, 2, 3 and the release of the Stay Up, Get Down EP, they were definitely still something different than what the rest of the crop of neon pop-punk bands at that time brought to the table, such as Every Avenue, or Ann Arbor, or even, Mayday Parade. You see, honestly, I wouldn't even consider the Maine a pop-punk band at heart, even on their earliest releases. Nothing about them was really ever all that punk, at least musically. I guess overall, and I put a lot of thought into this, I would consider them get ready for this one, a neon pop indie rock band, as opposed to a pop punk band, but just for the sake of simplicity and not being confusing, I will still be referring to them, as a neon pop punk band throughout this video, but if I had to specifically classify them in this era, For me, it would definitely be neon pop indie rock. That's what the Maine were, I think. But yeah, anyway. So, following the successful release of the Stay Up Get Down EP, which as I had mentioned earlier, did super well online and their MySpace numbers were reaching new, insane heights, the band began to play shows around their local area of Phoenix. They still couldn't tour until the summertime because of Pat and Garrett still being in high school, but due to their rising online popularity, it didn't really matter because an audience was building regardless.
Where do you see yourselves in a year from now?
Just hopefully just touring and getting ready.
Speak louder, Pat. Be a man.
Recording and getting ready to like put out a record and touring full time. And
I think that. Hopefully endorsed by Wheat Thins by then.
Wheat Thins. Wheat Thins and Red Vines.
More chest hair.
And spinny cones.
Spinny cones. If we could get to the point where we go to any McDonald's in the nation and get spinny cones for free, I'd be down for that.
Sweet. Sounds good.
Yeah.
They did, however, travel out of state once around this time to play a show with a fellow up-and-coming neon pop-punk act, you might have heard of him, The Cab, in Las Vegas one weekend. Although it was a good show for the band, some inter-band turbulence between members of the Maine actually ended up causing a change in the original lineup of the Maine. You see, after the show was over, or maybe after the main set, I'm guessing, at some point in the show, Pat and some of the other guys from the band were hanging out at their merch table when Alex Dillian, singer of The Cab, came up to Pat and offered them some money for coming out and playing the show. You see, because the Maine were still a much smaller band at this point, they agreed that they weren't going to get paid by the promoter or by the venue or whatever for playing the show. They were just, doing it for free. But out of the kindness of Alex from The Cab's heart, he wanted to give the Maine some of the money that The Cab had made from that show because he loved the guys in the Maine and he recognized that they had traveled out of state to play this show. But being the super nice guy that Pat from the Maine was, he didn't accept this money from Alex from The Cab because he didn't feel right taking money from The Cab's pocket. In Pat's eyes, being in the Maine and going out of state to play a show wasn't about making a profit, it was about the experience. However, original The Maine guitarist Alex Ross seemed to feel otherwise. Alex Ross, who was angry that Pat didn't accept this money from The Cab, apparently got into a bit of a verbal altercation with Pat, angry that Pat wouldn't want to get paid and didn't accept the money, and Alex actually ended up throwing a marker at Pat. Yes, you heard that right, a marker at Pat. Pat stormed off furious, found Garrett in their van or vehicle or whatever they were rolling in outside the venue, opened the door and was like, Alex is out of the band and that's final, all angry. And you see, the funny thing was, Pat and Garrett already had in that moment, a pretty good candidate for who should take Alex Ross's place, assuming that he was out of the band, a good friend of theirs who was actually there with them at that show on that Vegas trip. In fact, this friend had actually apparently literally quit his job so that he could travel to Las Vegas to do merch for them at that one show. He was already showing that he had a lot of dedication to the band, and he wasn't even actually in the band. This friend was a local Phoenix scenester by the name of Kennedy Brock. You see, Kennedy Brock used to be the lead singer of a MySpace-era Arizona local neon pop-punk band called Last Call for Camden.
And if the secrets got out, you'd be the talk of the town. Here is your secret. Will it stay secret?
Now, Last Call for Camden, sound-wise, were very similar to, your average 2006 MySpace pop-punk band from around that time. Similar to, like, a Stereo Skyline, if you will. But in early 2007, shortly after the Maine got going, Kennedy ended up leaving Last Call for Camden due to him growing kind of distant socially from the other members of the band, and also just differences in where they wanted to go musically. Now, Last Call for Camden actually ended up getting a new singer by the name of Brian Dales, and then they changed their name to the Somerset, who you also may have heard of. Very big band in the Warped Tour scene. You see, all these bands are like intertwined and interconnected in the Arizona scene for some reason. It's very cool. Anyways, around that time, preceding the Maine forming, Kennedy had actually become pretty close friends with Garrett and Pat for the past year or two, and he shared their same goals of making it in a successful band and making meaningful music and having meaningful experiences and touring and whatnot. They were already on the same page when it came to all of that, as all three of them would often stay up late at night having three-way phone calls with each other, discussing their dreams of being in a band and what kind of bands they wanted to be in. It kind of just made sense to have Kennedy in the band instead of Alex. For one thing, they obviously knew Kennedy way better. They didn't even really know Alex very well prior to him being in the band. He was just some random friend of Ryan Osterman's who just happened to play guitar and piano. Pat and Garrett were actually close with Kennedy and knew that Kennedy shared the same values as them, unlike Alex, who they just discovered valued getting paid a whole lot to the point where he would throw markers at people if he didn't get paid, I guess. Unlike Pat and Garrett, who just wanted to play cool shows and go on tour and whatnot. Kennedy felt the same way. Secondly, like I said earlier, Kennedy already had a certain level of commitment to the Maine, even though he wasn't a part of the Maine yet. So it was kind of a no-brainer, and after an awkward ride home from that show in Vegas with the cab, the Maine ended up kicking out Alex and carried on with Kennedy Brock as their new guitar player. But I actually forgot to mention the funniest part about Kennedy becoming their new guitar player. Kennedy just sang in his old band. He didn't really even know how to play guitar, at all. He didn't even own a guitar. He literally bought a guitar and learned as much as he could really quickly just to be in the Maine. A high amount of dedication right there. Something like that really shows that at that point, to Pat and Garrett and the rest of the Maine, Kennedy sharing the same values as well as the same dedication to the dream as them meant more than him actually being able to play his instrument, which is kind of badass. But with Ryan Osterman's help, Kennedy started learning chords pretty quickly and, eventually within time, a pretty quick amount of time, picked up how to play the Maine songs. Miraculously, he picked up skills on the guitar pretty fast, and the band carried on.
I'm Kennedy, I play guitar.
I'm Ryan, I play guitar.
John, I sing.
I'm Garrett, I play bass.
I'm Pat, and I play drums.
So, like I was saying, you guys are a fresh band. How do you guys think you've gone from where you were back then, starting a couple months ago, to where you guys are today?
Personally, a lot of it has to do with sites like MySpace.com and Daily Course and stuff like that. Simply because of networking, it's just so much easier to reach a larger number of people, where you don't have to, physically talk to them. You can just talk to them over the internet and become friends. So a lot of that has to do with websites like that.
Did you ever think you'd go from point A to point B so fast?
Yeah, definitely not so fast. We all kind of hoped it would get to this point. We just didn't know when it would. So I know we're really thankful to be where we are right now in such a short amount of time.
As you guys know, being a band, and you guys are somewhat young, it's awesome that you guys are young. You guys have an awesome crowd. But anyways, you always know that there's going to be haters out there, no matter if it's because they think you're too young to have this much exposure, or they're just not going to like your type of music. They think that you're just a little boy band wanting to go punk or whatever it is. How do you guys plan on dealing with that, and what do you have to say about that?
I really don't think it's a problem, because there's always going to be people who disagree with what you're doing or don't like what you're doing. I know that all five of us are wholeheartedly, into what we do, so it's kind of shake the haters off. I don't know. I don't know. Dust your shoulders off, in the words of Jay-Z.
We like what we're doing, so there's gonna be people that like it and there's gonna be people that don't like it, so just take it as it comes, I guess.
Now, at this point in time, which by now we are approaching the summer of 2007, things were going quite well for the Maine. In fact, they were already in talks with a few different record labels who were interested in signing them, most notably including Fearless Records, who had bands like Plain White T's, as well as up-and-coming pop-punk acts such as Every Avenue, The Morning Light, and Mayday Parade, as well as, believe it or not, Fueled by Ramen, who were arguably the biggest label in the pop-punk world around that time, obviously having artists such as Fall Out Boy, Paramore, Panic at the Disco, The Academy Is, Cute Is What We Aim For, literally the biggest bands on the planet at that time when it came to, pop-punk or emo pop or whatever you want to call it. The Maine hadn't even been a band for a whole year yet, and half of the band was still in fucking high school, and they were already having talks with some of the biggest labels in the whole scene. Wow, good going, guys. That's fucking awesome. However, despite these crazy dreams that at one point may have seemed so far-fetched that were starting to come true for the band, unfortunately there were still problems within their lineup, and seemingly not every member of the band was still remaining as committed as everybody else. You see, Ryan Osterman, up until that point, had pretty much been the main songwriter for the Maine. He wrote all the music and arranged everything for all those songs on the Stay Up Get Down EP, while John wrote most of the words and vocal melodies, but the songs as a whole were mostly Ryan's songwriting. So Ryan really was a big part of the Maine when they first started. However, around this time that Kennedy had joined and the Maine were starting to gain some real traction and started talking to these big labels, Ryan's commitment to the band, as well as his interest in, the band, started to wane. Apparently, he started showing up late for practices and was just ultimately showing less enthusiasm to be a part of the band and contribute. At that point in time, the beginning of the summer of 2007, the last two things the band had done with Ryan were write and record their now infamous cover of Akon's hit, I Wanna Love You, and they had also written the song The Way We Talk with Ryan. The original plan was that they were going to record The Way We Talk, the song, just as a single and release it. Pat had called Ryan to ask him what date would work for him to go to a studio with them and record the song, to which Ryan, over the phone, told him that he no longer wanted to be a member of the Maine. Now, in that moment, Pat's heart kind of sank, because as I said, Ryan was kind of the main songwriter for the band, a big part of the band. Him quitting in that moment seemed kind of like everything that they had just worked for was about to be gone, right as things were really starting to go really well for them too, and the dream seemed to be coming true. Ryan had quit, and the Maine were unsure of their future, and they were fucking nervous. Either way, summer of 2007, Ryan Osterman is out, and the Maine needed to figure out what they were going to do, and fast, because they actually had, believe it or not, a whole summer tour already booked, their first tour ever, which was the Maine, Brighton, and the Morning Light. That was the tour package. Pretty fucking sick, and they were about to leave for that very soon. Now, they had enlisted their friend Jared Monaco to fill in on guitar for this tour. Jared was also another local scenester who grew up in the same neighborhood as Pat and Garrett and was a good friend of John's and also of Tim Kirch's, he was kind of part of that group. He had actually played in a local Arizona band called Bad Motivation when he was younger, who I had mentioned earlier, alongside Eric Halverson, who he went on to play in A Rocket to the Moon. So, getting Jared to come and fill in for the Maine already felt like a good move, considering Jared was kind of in the family, as it were. And with that, with two brand new guitarists, one who wasn't even officially in the band, and another who didn't even really actually play guitar, and their future as a band kind of uncertain, even though all of this fucking hype was happening around them, the Maine embarked on their first ever tour in the summer of 2007 alongside Brighton and the Morning Light, who are also two amazing bands. I just want to throw that out there.
Music, and you know it up front. I see you winding up on that pole. I know it's feeling you already know. Already know I wanna know.
Alright, now, it's time for a funny story. So, when the Maine had finally returned home from their first tour, you know, the hype started to grow off the chain, and it was officially time for the boys in the Maine to get real, get serious, and pick a record label to sign to. It was just time. After all, this was 2007. This was back in the era where signing to a record label was like the #1 seal of legitimacy for a band, you know, to show the world that you've made it, and the best way of taking your band to the next level and getting better promotion, getting on better tours, growing a bigger fan base, etc., the whole nine. So, interestingly enough, when it came down to the wire, like I was saying, the Maine had to basically choose between signing to Fearless Records or signing to Fueled by Ramen. The Maine could have been a Fueled by Ramen band, isn't that crazy? Those were the two labels that were most interested in them, and the Maine were seriously considering both of them. I mean, both labels were extremely prevalent and popular in the scene at the time, and both theoretically would have been great options. However, the funniest part of this, if you ask me, is this fun fact, which Garrett and Pat have talked about a few times on the 8123 podcast. Now, at this point in time, in 2007, it turns out that Shant Hasikian, lead singer of Cute Is What We Aim For, who were, you know, I don't have to tell you guys, a very popular Fueled by Ramen scene band at the time, was apparently very into the Maine's music from the get-go. He actually found them on MySpace pretty early on and reposted one of their early songs onto his MySpace page, which actually got the Maine a good amount of buzz very early on, just from Shant, from Cute Is What We Aim For, putting their song on his MySpace. It sounds really funny now, but that's literally how shit worked back then. That's, you know, that's how, like, people got put on the map, was someone famous putting your song onto their page, or people, you know, y'all remember MySpace. Anyways, apparently, at that time, Shant was actually planning on starting a record label of his own. Now, this never actually ended up coming to fruition, but at the time, he was planning on starting a label, which would have been a subsidiary label of Fueled by Ramen, kind of similar to Pete Wentz's subsidiary label, Decadence Records, under Fueled by Ramen, you know what I mean? And apparently the plan was for the Maine to be the first band signed to Shant's new label. Which is really funny to me. It was either that or sign with Fearless Records. Now, from the band's point of view, signing to Fueled by Ramen or Shant's subsidiary of Fueled by Ramen or whatever would obviously be a very tempting choice because, I mean, come on, as I had mentioned earlier, they had all the popular bands in the genre. Paramore, Fall Out Boy, Panic, Cobra Starship, all that shit was on Fueled by Ramen. If you were like 17 in a pop punk band in 2007, of course you would want to sign to fucking Fueled by Ramen. Who the fuck wouldn't? Seems like a bad idea not to, you know? However, the band actually did end up signing to Fearless Records instead of Fueled by Ramen. Pretty fucking crazy, right? Why did they do this, you ask? Let me tell you. Now, Fearless wasn't quite as big of a label as Fueled by Ramen, and their bands weren't as big either. They did have bands like the Plain White T's, who were huge, but most of their roster consisted of bands like Gatsby's American Dream, Yesterday's Rising, Portugal the Man, A Static Lullaby, Alasana, some bigger names for sure, but they had more of a little bit of a boutique underground roster, you know what I mean? At least compared to Fueled by Ramen for sure. But why would the Maine go with Fearless Records instead of Fueled by Ramen? Doesn't it seem kind of counterintuitive not to want to sign with the obviously bigger label? Well, yes and no. Now, the Maine's decision to sign with Fearless was a very smart and a very important decision, and it literally might be like the sole reason why they're still around today. I guess it all kind of boils down to the fear that if they were to have signed to Shant from Cute Is What We Aim For's Fueled by Ramen imprint label, the band would have basically just been marketed as and perceived as just a mini Cute Is What We Aim For. Cute Is What We Aim For 2.0, if you will. And there's a possibility that they would have just been pushed by the label to make a super poppy record as a means to compete with Fueled by Ramen's other huge mainstream success bands on their label. So I guess really at the end of the day, I'm filming this part in the future, which is why I and the room look different. But because I didn't say my thoughts well the first time. But basically, it all comes down to the idea that if the Maine signed to Fueled by Ramen, they would have really been the small fish in a gigantic pond full of sea monsters. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't matter how much the Maine were blowing up at the time. You know, I don't think that they really had the potential to become like a mainstream success band, and they would have been like literally competing with Fall Out Boy and Paramore and all that, and they might have been just put on the back burner on that label, and they might not have been remembered as well. You know, they might have ended up like a band like Power Space, or like, I don't know, the Friday Night Boys, that were kind of just like put on the back burner a little bit. Apparently when they were talking with the owner of Fearless Records, Bob Becker, he apparently told them, he was like, look, like, you guys are blowing up, you guys are going to be my main priority for the next year or so. For the next year of my business life with my label is going to be promoting the Maine. So I guess, you know, it really came down to the fact that the Maine felt like they would have more personal attention on them from Fearless as opposed to Fueled by Ramen. They felt more at home with the people from Fearless, even though it was a smaller label. You know, they were kind of blowing up. They would have been more the big fish in the smaller Fearless pond, as opposed to possibly getting lost in the shuffle with Fueled by Ramen. So that's basically, you know, kind of in a nutshell why they went with Fearless, and it was a really smart decision, and like I said, is a big contributor as to why they are even still around to this day, but we'll get into that more later. Back to past Julian. Anyways, after officially signing to Fearless Records in the fall of 2007, the Maine then returned to the studio for the first time, writing and recording with their two new guitar players, Jared, who was officially in the band now at this point, and Kennedy, and they recorded their first official EP to be released on a real label with real promotion and distribution and whatnot, physical copies, which was the legendary The Way We Talk EP, which was released on December 11th of 2007 through Fearless Records.
Oh, she's crashed to death, she'll be the death of me. Seduction leads to destruction. She's fresh to death, she'll be the death of me. She's fresh, but not so
cool. Alright. The Way We Talk EP. Now, it's pretty interesting because it seems like there's a pretty stark difference between the way the band views this EP versus the way that, like, I view this EP. I'll start this off by saying that, like I had just mentioned, when the Maine went in to write and record this EP, they were basically a brand new band when you think about it. They had two new guitar players who had both just joined the band very recently, not to mention their old guitar player Ryan used to be the Maine songwriter, and now he was gone. Not to mention their singer John had never really written songs like by himself before without the help of Ryan, and was new to music in general, and Kennedy was like new to guitar playing. It was a pretty weird situation when you look at it, and I think the final product of the Way We Talk EP is like way better than what you would imagine from a band, you know, in that situation. Now, according to the band, this EP really represents those growing pains that came with getting used to, you know, all the things that I just described, which makes total sense, you know, having been in bands myself and having gone through similar difficulties with lineup changes. I totally understand and empathize with how that would be a pretty stressful writing process, especially with the added pressure of it being your, like, big label debut, you know? Also, once again, according to Pat and Garrett on the 8123 podcast, at the time of them making The Way We Talk, apparently, and this is pretty strange but and odd, but various friends of the band and people close to them and their inner circle and whatnot apparently were actually coming to them and being like brutally honest with them and saying that they thought their new stuff just wasn't as good as their older stuff. I don't really agree with that, but That's what was happening. And it seems like while the members of the band do have appreciation for this EP and this era of the band, it doesn't really seem like they are super proud of this EP in hindsight, and they kind of view it as just sort of something that was thrown together and not very stand out, and like I said, just representative of those growing pains that they were going through, which makes sense. But they were also really way more focused on putting everything they had songwriting-wise into their upcoming full-length record, but just kind of threw together the Way We Talk EP because Fearless wanted them to put out an EP before their album, and they also needed something, something real to release for people to listen to, so that they could go out and tour leading up to the release of their full-length. You know what I mean? However, let me tell you my personal connection to this EP as a fan, and a lot of you watching will probably relate to this as well. So the release of the Way We Talk EP is where I personally first found the Maine. Back in 2007, 2008, I was a devout reader and subscriber of Alternative Press magazine, as I'm sure many of you were as well, and at the time I was super into using that magazine to find new up-and-coming bands. Like many other scenesters at the time, I was absolutely obsessed with trying to find the bands who would become the next big thing, but while they were still small, so I could watch bands blow up and then be able to say things like, "Ha, good for them, I knew them when they had just put out their first EP before any of y'all knew about them," and have that sort of, gloating sense of entitlement about it, making predictions on who would become the next Fall Out Boy and whatnot, or who would simply be just a flash in the pan. It was fun. Around this time, thanks to the ads for up-and-coming new bands in Alternative Press magazine, I found a lot of these bands before they started to blow up. I started listening to, and I'm just gonna brag for a second, so sorry, but come on, I earned it. I started listening to Every Avenue right around the time that they put out their EP. I remember listening to Mayday Parade just before A Lesson in Romantics came out. I found The Morning Light when they put out their first EP, The Sounds of Love. I remember listening to A Rocket to the Moon right around before Greetings From EP came out. All that shit. It was fun. It was a fun time in the scene on MySpace. Anyway, sorry, I just had to gloat a little bit there because, come on, like I said, I earned it. Why the fuck can't I, brag about that? It's been enough time. I can brag about it. It's cool. We're all adults here. Anyway, anyways, like I said, it was fun finding these bands as they were first getting signed and then watching where exactly their career trajectories went following that. It's something that I've always been very interested in, and honestly a huge reason why I make these YouTube videos today. Anyways, it was no different for the Maine. I remember seeing advertisements for them as the newest neon pop punk band to be signed to Fearless Records right as the Way We Talk EP came out in winter of 2007. Seeing as how Fearless Records' two previous signees, Every Avenue and The Morning Light, had quickly become two of my new favorite bands just prior, I had faith that I would love the newest Fearless band just as much, so I ordered the Way We Talk EP from the Fearless Records web store. I distinctly remember being like, man, the Maine just look way more neon and poppy and kind of goofier than Every Avenue or The Morning Light. Despite signing to Fearless as opposed to Fueled by Ramen, at least aesthetically during that era, they still had, a big chunk of the cute is what we aim for 2.0 syndrome going on, but that's a whole other can of beans. Needless to say, after, the Way We Talk EP arrived at my house and I spun that EP quite a few times, my intuition proved to be correct, and the Maine quickly became one of my favorite new up-and-coming bands at that point. I don't need to tell you guys who, based on my YouTube analytics, are around the same age as me, if not a bit older, about how a band like the Maine, and even more specifically an EP like The Way We Talk, at the time was like a warm hug for 12-year-old me, consoling me and getting me through all of my earliest middle school crushes and heartbreaks. Come on, that shit cuts deep, I was in 6th or 7th grade around that time, and my whole life, my whole brain space pretty much just consisted of thinking about girls, getting sad about girls, and then listening to the Maine to get me through those sad thoughts about girls. You know how it is. But if you want to talk about the music, despite what the band had apparently thought about the way we talk, like I had mentioned earlier, I remember thinking of this EP and kind of regarding it as being quite literally a solid example of a perfect pop punk EP in my mind. I was absolutely in love with this EP from start to finish, and I really still am, to be quite honest. Like I was mentioning earlier, I was obsessed with John O'Callaghan's unique vocals and enamored with how relaxed and chill he sounds on this EP. Not to mention, I'm just fucking repeating myself here, but the more indie rock influence on the EP, you know, it's still there. You know, that fucking lead line in The Way We Talk, that's like indie as fuck, you know, kinda, right? You know what I mean? Maybe. I don't know. I think there's still a very prevalent indie rock influence in there, which, you know, I think helped the Maine stand out and show everybody that, even this early on in their career, that they were already way more than just Cute Is What We Aim For 2.0, despite what their, you know, promo pictures at the time might have told you otherwise. Now, my favorite track on this EP is probably the opening song, If I Only Had the Heart. I also think We Change, We Wait, and obviously the re-recorded The Town's Been Talkin' are super strong tracks, and the re-recorded version of Give Me Anything came out super well, and it's a nice little addition to the track listing of this EP. I guess the only song that really sounds a bit dated for me would be the title track, The Way We Talk. This song itself, you know, I can't fail to mention, it was a huge song at the time, and it was kind of the Maine's first real hit. It was definitely the song that really put the Maine on the map within the scene and took them to the next level. You know, huge success. And I can say that I look back on this song fondly, but like I said, with some of the lyrics, you know, she's fresh to death, show me the death of me, and you know, also with this song kind of being really the only song in the Maine's whole catalog that lyrically is like pretty immature, this girl sucks, like this girl's easy, vaguely, you know, misogynistic, lyrical wise, you know, kind of makes this song as a whole sound a bit dated to me, and, you know, hasn't aged necessarily well. I don't really relate to it as an adult, but you know, it's still way better than a lot of the other shit that came out from, you know, the other neon pop punk bands from around this time. And like I said, it was a huge song for the band at the time and really launched them to the next level in terms of popularity, and was an extremely popular song for the Maine for many years after that in their early career as a band, their first few years as a group. So I guess overall, if you ask me, The Way We Talk EP is definitely a true classic if you're at all into the late 2000s neon pop punk wave and all those bands, and it's without a doubt an EP that will always be extremely close to my heart. Hats off to you, The Way We Talk EP. You're a legend, and we all still stan and respect you.
It's the beginning of 2008, and it's pretty much a huge year for you guys. There's a couple new things. You guys are recently signed to Fearless Records. You guys have a new EP out, and you have a new band member. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about your new EP that's out. It's called The Way We Talk. And right now it just debuted on the Billboard's Heat Seeker at number 10, which is the Hot Shot debut. And for you guys that don't know that, it's pretty much when a band hasn't released anything, and so these people, it's their first EP and it debuted at number 10. So how do you guys feel about that, knowing that you guys debuted at number 10, and I mean, it possibly means that you can move up?
Craziness. No, I don't know, we really didn't have much expectations. I don't know, if I'm just talking for myself, I didn't really think anyone really knew us. I mean, I think you're probably going to ask this next, but I think Fearless has a lot to do with, you know, some of the success we've been having. But I mean, we're just really stoked right now, and we'll see. We're going to keep touring, and we'll see where we go from there.
Can you kind of give us a little sneak peek on what your fans can expect on your new CD?
Oh, say no. I don't know. You probably won't be surprised by too much. I'm not going to say mature because Matt from the Morning Light didn't say mature. But Justin from Brighton told us that he's going to this is going to be his favorite music ever. So there's definitely poppy songs. Like, I guess our old stuff is really poppy. But I don't know. Like, writing this album, I think we were really focused on, hooks and choruses and kind of going back to when we were kids in the 90s, I guess, and remembering bands like Third Eye Blind and stuff like that.
Since you've been there and now you're here, what's like the advice that you could give to like bands out there that are watching this and that want to be where you guys are at today?
The MySpace thing is kind of just if you want to do it. I mean, you just got to be really dedicated. That's pretty much it. I mean, none of us have jobs anymore. None of us go to school. Now we're just really focused and dedicated to what we're doing right now. So I guess that means you have to really love what you're doing and be prepared to be poor. That's pretty much it.
So, after the successful release of the Way We Talk EP, which ended up, believe it or not, debuting at number 6 on the iTunes Top 100 Alternative chart, and shot to number 10 on the Billboard Heatseekers chart, and also ended up selling more than 50,000 copies, which is a hugely successful, amount of copies to sell for a band's debut EP on a record label. Paired with the huge success of this EP, around this time, Garrett and Pat had actually gotten the opportunity to either graduate high school early or possibly finish out their senior year of high school online, something like that, not exactly sure which one, but either way, they didn't have to physically attend the rest of their senior year, so the band was now able to start touring full-time. The band started off 2008, as well as the touring cycle for the Way We Talk EP, as it were, going out on some smaller tours, the first of which being a tour opening up for The Secret Handshake with fellow openers Danger Radio and Power Space, all of which being, kind of smaller bands in the scene at the time, on a tour called, get this, The Secret of the Dangerous Radio from Maine in Space Tour. Very clever, I guess. So, funny story about that Secret Handshake tour. So, the Maine were billed, as it were, as direct support for the Secret Handshake, but because of the success of, the Way We Talk EP and the Maine really beginning to blow up around that time, apparently people were coming to the shows just to see the Maine and were actually leaving after they played before the Secret Handshake set. Apparently this had become such a problem that the dude from the Secret Handshake actually asked the Maine to headline instead, since everyone was like fucking leaving before his set. So the Maine ended up actually saying no to this because they weren't comfortable with being a headlining act yet. They didn't even have enough songs, etc. So they stayed, as their spot as direct support. But that's pretty funny and interesting, and obviously is telling of how much the Maine really were blowing up at this time and moving, upwards in popularity past these smaller scene bands like Power Space and Danger Radio and even The Secret Handshake around this time in 2008. Anyways, right after that tour, the band set out on another smaller tour, opening up for Family Force 5 on the, another goofy tour name here, the Skeletor and the Rock and Roll Champions of the Universe tour, with fellow opening act, a band called Ivory Line. All the while, during the first half of 2008, the band was also writing and recording for their first full-length record, which was slated for a summertime release. Now, the last shows that the Maine played before the release of their first full-length album, and incidentally the final shows of the, the Way We Talk EP touring cycle, as it were, was a stint of about 2 weeks on that summer's 2008 Vans Warped Tour. Definitely a dream come true for the band. After their stint on that summer's Warped Tour, to put it bluntly, life was about to really begin for the Maine as a band in a big way. In many huge ways, actually. So, first of all, right after getting off of that stint on Warped Tour, which, as I stated, is, getting on Warped Tour is a dream come true for any band around that time, the band spent the rest of that summer playing on the opening slot on easily the biggest tour that they as a band had landed yet. In fact, they had somehow gotten themselves on what might have been one of the biggest, most fucking high-profile scene tours of 2008 as a whole, for that matter. The band really struck gold with this opportunity, their next step as a band. The tour in question that they were opening up for was the Soundtrack to Your Summer Tour, with headliners Boys Like Girls, who were, a huge mainstream MTV success at the time, Good Charlotte, obviously another insanely huge and influential band, Metro Station, another, gigantic mainstream scene band who were, just breaking out on MTV at the time, and the Maine. That was the lineup of the fucking tour. Absolutely insane. That must have been a real, holy shit moment for the Maine. I mean, fuck, it was an arena tour! The band were playing arenas, opening up for literally, some of the biggest bands in the scene, some of the biggest bands of that decade, actually, if you think about it. What an amazing milestone for them, and what an amazing opening slot for them to have landed, It must have gotten them great exposure, and they must have really felt like, that's what I wished that I had been doing the summer after I graduated high school, 18 years old on this huge tour, poppin' band, opening up for fucking Boys Like Girls. That's crazy. Living the dream. And if you can believe this, that's not even the best scenario about this tour for the Maine. To top it all off, on the very first date, apparently, of this huge tour, the Maine's first full-length record, the legendary, the classic Can't Stop, Won't Stop, was released on Fearless Records. I mean, is this not the literal greatest example of living the fucking dream you can think of? Like I said, 18 years old, fresh out of high school, band was blowing up, it's the middle of summer, they just released their debut record on the first day of this opening up for this fucking arena tour. The Maine were doing it real big, living the fucking dream, really striking neon pop punk gold and making neon history on this tour in the summer of 2008. Anyways, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, the Maine's first full-length album. Let's talk about that album, shall we? Because I got some thoughts.
Well, she thinks I'm crazy, judging by the faces that she's making. And I think she's pretty, but pretty's just part of the things she does that amaze me.
So, Can't Stop, Won't Stop was released on July 8th of 2008 through Fearless Records. It was produced by scene superstar producer Matt Squire, who was a huge contributor in the neon pop punk wave at the time. He produced so many of those classic albums from that era, like Panic at the Disco's A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, Cute Is What We Aim For is the Same Old Blood Rush with a New Touch, All Time Low's So Wrong It's Right, Boys Like Girls' first record, Forever the Sickest Kids' Underdog Alma Mater. He was one of the top dogs when it came to producers in the scene at the time, and obviously the records that he made were all really fucking good and huge successes, and they sounded great production-wise, so, working with him must definitely have been a no-brainer for the Maine, and also yet another dream come true for the young band.
Hey everyone, it's Jeffree Star, and you're watching BuzzNet, and today I'm interviewing the Maine.
What up?
What up? What up? Alright guys, so you have a new album titled Can't Stop, Won't Stop, coming out July 8th. Tell BuzzNet something special about the album.
We recorded with Matt Squire.
We recorded in a place called The Lair.
The dungeon.
It is an album consisting of 12 songs. in their audio files about chilling.
There's a guitar on the album. 2 guitars on the album, actually.
Wow. There's some drums too.
And it comes out July 8th.
Now, I love the record Can't Stop, Won't Stop. I always have. This album is definitely one of my favorite albums in general from that whole neon pop punk wave. And just on a personal level, this album has a lot of meaning for me and is very, very close to my heart. Kind of like what I was saying earlier about the Way We Talk EP. These songs basically got me through all of my earliest crushes and heartbreaks when I was like 13 years old. So, I personally have a lot of nostalgia and personal meaning attached to the songs on Can't Stop, Won't Stop. This album has also aged surprisingly well, if you ask me. I've never felt like I've really truly grown out of this album, or, I've always went back to it throughout the years growing up, and I've always loved these songs throughout my whole life since, I started listening to it when it was first released, and I can honestly say I still love this album to this day. I think in a lot of ways, this album was kind of a breath of fresh air in the scene at the time, something a little different than everybody else was doing. It may not necessarily seem that way if you just listen to it once, right firsthand or whatever, but I think if you look a little bit closely, look a little bit more closer into it, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, in my opinion, was a very bold debut, and I think that the Maine brought some, different sounds and different styles, different textures, and, different sonic vibes, if you will, to the table, compared to, what the other bands in the neon pop punk wave were bringing to the table at the time. It was something a little different. And also, a really big point I want to make about this album is I really feel like it was like the perfect launching place for them to evolve off of into the rest of their career. I'm going to expand on that more. Now, there were definitely a lot of different directions the Maine could have taken it musically on this record, and for starters, I will say that on this album, the Maine were doing a little bit less of that sort of Copeland-esque indie rock / neon pop punk mashup sound that I've been talking about throughout this whole video, and that they were doing on their first couple EPs. There are still elements of that sound on this album, specifically in John O's vocal style, as well as the generally relaxed, breezy vibe throughout the whole record. In my opinion, the Maine still definitely had a lot more in common with a band like The Morning Light, on the chiller, more indie side of pop punk, than they did with the more abrasive, punk-rooted pop punk bands like Saves the Day or Newfound Glory. Like I said, they're still not like a punk band, but this album is definitely a lot poppier and more upbeat than their previous output. It's maybe a little bit more urgent sounding as well. Now, the thing is, what I really do admire about what the Maine accomplished on Can't Stop, Won't Stop is that although this album is poppy and upbeat throughout, and it has its share of super poppy anthemic singles like Everything I Ask For or Girls Do What They Want, the album also dips its feet into a lot of different, more experimental territory. Not experimental in like a prog rock sort of way, but just songs that weren't... It wasn't a record full of only pop bangers like Girls Do What They Want throughout the whole thing. It had songs that offered different sounds and styles and vibes that not all the neon pop punk bands didn't necessarily do at that time. Other bands weren't bringing to the table. You know what I mean? For example, songs like I Must Be Dreaming or This Is the End offer some different blends of neon pop rock. You have a song like Whoever She Is, which is a perfect, a pop punk acoustic tearjerker, while a song like Kiss and Sell is a great pop rock banger in 3/4, which has a very unique feel for the album, a standout track if you ask me. A song like Into Your Arms kept the band rooted in that more indie, piano-heavy style that they sort of originally were, started with, and the re-recorded version of Count 'Em 1, 2, 3 offers some of their literal roots to this album, considering it was the first track on their first ever EP and is a great addition to the track list of this album. And the biggest example of the band taking a real experimental leap into left field is the album's, obviously if you know, it's the album's closing track, We'll All Be, which sounds a lot more in line with the more 90s alt-rock style that the Maine sounds like on their newer albums. So this was a perfect track to close out the album with, because it really gave an idea, you know, people didn't know it at the time, but it really gave a realistic idea of where the band was going to evolve into in the future. If you ask me, this song, We'll All Be, would sound right at home on like their 2011 record, Pioneer, or even their 2015 record, American Candy. I guess the real important point that I'm really trying to get at right now, though, is that the Maine easily could have made a record that was just pop punk banger singles like Girls Do What They Want. A whole album of Girls Do What They Want. And the young band probably would have been happy with an album of Girls Do What They Want at the time, and there were definitely, you know, record labels who would have told them that it was a good idea to make a whole album of Girls Do What They Want. I mean, cha-ching, right? Money. But that's not what the Maine did at all on this album. They had all these different styles and flavors of songs throughout the album, and not all of them were super poppy or had the potential of being big singles or whatever. You know, it wasn't an album full of singles all the way through. But the fact of the matter is, if you're looking at the long game of playing music, or the idea of having longevity as a band, having a first record that's all Girls Do What They Want throughout is actually not a good idea at all. Now, the best example of this from around this time that I can think of is Forever the Sickest Kids' first album, Underdog Alma Mater. That's an album of all Girls Do What They Want, metaphorically, you know what I mean? That album is all pop bangers from start to finish. It's an album that every song could be the single, you know? It's like 12 singles all in a row. And it's a great album. I fucking love Underdog Alma Mater by Forever the Sickest Kids. But that's the thing. What happened to Forever the Sickest Kids after that record? They fell off. They lost a lot of their hype pretty quickly and weren't really ever able to recover from that, and within a few years were broken up. They, you know, that record, they got huge. They got too huge too quick. They hit a ceiling. They put out a record that was almost too good, and then they burnt out. Couldn't follow it up. You see what I'm saying? You following me here? And I think a big reason for that is because Underdog Alma Mater was, you know, an album of Girls Do What They Want. Forever the Sickest Kids made the perfect album for the summer of 2008, but there wasn't really any room to grow from off of that, or any room for them to, you know, space for them to evolve past that record. Can't Stop, Won't Stop, however, is, in hindsight, really the smartest album that the Maine could have possibly made at that time, if you're thinking about the long game. The album was poppy and relevant, you know, at the time, and contemporary enough for the album to get huge and for the band to make plenty of big waves in the scene at the time. You know, it was a really big album. They were, you know, became a big band really quickly, but there was also plenty of room for evolution and experimentation and growth after Can't Stop, Won't Stop, because it wasn't an album of just Girls Do What They Want. You know what I mean? They weren't necessarily setting themselves up to be stuck in 2008 like Forever the Sickest Kids were. And the proof is in the fucking pudding, because the Maine are obviously still around to this day, and astonishingly, in my opinion, and in a lot of other people's opinions out there, their best music they've ever made has been their most recent, like, 3 or 4 records. Everything they've made after Pioneer and Forever Halloween and American perfect records. They're only getting better as time goes on. You can't say that about Mayday Parade. You can't say that about, you know, who the fuck else is even around. You can't say that about All Time Low, I don't think. And you can't say that about Forever the Sickest Kids, or A Rocket to the Moon, or Every Avenue. You want to know why? Because all those bands fucking broke up, because they couldn't evolve past that. They couldn't, you know, they didn't set themselves up for the long game. The Maine, they did. This band ended up aging extremely well for a 2008 neon pop punk band, arguably better than all the other bands from that time, which, if you had asked me in 2008 if I thought the Maine were going to be around in 12 years and were going to be better than ever, you know, and age like a fine wine, I don't think I would have been like, nah, definitely not them. I mean, I would have predicted maybe The Morning Light would have lasted, or maybe, you know, A Rocket to the Moon, or I don't know. It's the Maine. It's weird. They didn't, you know, you look at those old pictures from back in the day and it's like, wow, that's the bands from that scene that did it, that really, really fucking did it, you know? I don't know. I'm just going off on a tangent now, but you know what I mean? It's just so cool. It's just so cool to see where they've come from around that time. The Maine might have been the only band from that era who successfully washed the neon stink off of them all the way and aged like a fine wine and made their best records later in their career. In fact, if you look at the grand scheme of things, the Maine had barely even begun to even start to discover who the Maine really were on Can't Stop, Won't Stop. It wasn't really until 2011's Pioneer or 2013's Forever Halloween that the Maine really started to become the Maine and truly find themselves musically, you know? And that's the whole reason why they've been able to beat the odds and evolve so graciously, is heavily in part due to the kind of record that they made right here on Can't Stop, Won't Stop. The decision to go on Fearless instead of Fueled by Ramen. The decision to make a record that wasn't just huge pop record, you know, and kind of have a place to launch from. But I digress. I'm just going off on fucking tangents now. I'm gonna talk a lot more about the later career of the Maine and their evolution from, you know, the neon days in a future video. I know this video isn't labeled as a part 1, but it secretly is a part 1. I'm gonna make a part 2 after this, talking about the rest of the Maine's career. But either way, Can't Stop, Won't Stop was a super successful album for them at the time, and the Maine quickly became one of the biggest bands in that whole neon pop punk wave after the release of this record in the summer of 2008. I mean, they were just going on, you know, huge tour after huge tour. You know, they did the whole Warped Tour in 2009. They were like one of the biggest bands on that tour. Everyone fucking remembers the Maine, you know what I mean? It was like All Time Low, Mayday Parade, the Maine. Those were like the big kahunas, if you ask me, from the neon pop punk wave. I mean, you know, Forever the Sickest Kids were huge too, but they were, you know, maybe a little bit more in a pop world with them. And then, you know, you had Every Avenue, who were also huge, but they were like a little lower on the, you know, on the scale of popularity. But the Maine were really, you know, they really did it real big. And it's a true story of some, you know, high school kids who had a dream to be this, you know, grew up listening to The Used and to Taking Back Sunday and Panic at the Disco, My Chemical Romance, you know, and grew up studying all these bands that were big on the Warped Tour and watching the DVDs and, you know, being obsessed with the idea of just being a band, and then just really we're fucking dedicated to it. We're in the right time at the right place, made the right music, made great music, and we're just really fucking dedicated. And, you know, they weren't egotistical. They've never been an egotistical band. They've never been on some rock star shit. They've always been the sweetest, down-to-earth guys. And, you know, as kids, they really just, like I said, were dedicated and made their dreams come true. And that's what this video is to me. That's what I'm going to leave it off as these kids that, you know, beat the odds and really fucking just took their dream. And it's like that Shia LaBeouf thing, like, just do it. They really did. The Maine did. They didn't let their dreams be dreams. They took their dreams and they said, we've studied the bands that have done it. We don't have anything else that we want to do. We're not setting ourselves up for anything else in life. This is the only thing that we want to do and that we're gonna do is fucking, you know, be a successful band and have people come to the shows and have people love us. And that's exactly what they did, and they accomplished it. And, you know, Can't Stop, Won't Stop still to this day is, you know, to me, very representative of that. It's representative of, you know, just fucking going full force on your dreams, but also, you know, not being egotistical about it. A lot of that record is about, you know, friends and you know, your hometown and where you come from and how important that is, you know. And that's something that the Maine have always held on to, is the importance of where they come from. You know, they're not trying to act like they weren't a neon band. They're not trying to, you know, distance themselves from their past. They've always, you know, recognized that and been proud. You know, I'm just wicked proud of the Maine, man. And they were a super meaningful band for me growing up. You know, they still are one of my top 5 favorite bands of all time. I feel like I've grown up with them. Anyways, I could talk on and on and on. I'm trying not to talk too much about that because like I said, I'm going to make a part 2 to this and talk about the rest of their career and their growth after the neon era. But so I'll try to save that for next time. But anyways, thank you so much for tuning in to yet another video. It's your man, the Cozy Representative. I got a lot of stuff coming up in the future. Thank you all for as always, thank you all for the continued support. It means so much to me. I hope y'all are doing well out there. Pick up some Ride or Die clothing. I'll leave the link for that in the description. Support. It's a good thing, so support it. Anyways, yeah, I love y'all. Peace out. Have an awesome day or week or whatever. See you next time.